Welcome. My name is Philip. I'm the owner of YamaOne Social Impact Communications, and I just wanted to take this moment to welcome you to our inaugural social impact dialogue. So the intent behind these dialogues is really just to have a weekly conversation, a very informal conversation with experts to help you to really dig into the details of grassroots organizing, communications, public relations, all to advance social causes. So for those of you who are watching and playing along at home live, feel free to join in this conversation by submitting questions or comments below. If you're watching this taped, also feel free to add your suggestions. I know a lot of you are experts out there, love to have a running dialogue of suggestions, or ask comments or questions for future dialogue. So really excited about this, looking forward. So want to go ahead and just kick this thing off and bring in our guest, Mrs. Valerie Holford. Welcome, Valerie. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
Yes, so Valerie, I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, like, okay, with the inaugural one, I got to bring in somebody with some pizzazz and some pop, and you, of course, came to mind. So I really do appreciate you joining us for this one.
Well, thank you. I'll try to live up to the hype.
Yeah, I'm setting the bar high for you, right? I'm setting the bar high for you. And so before we launch into the dialogue, Valerie, this is the part of the show where we need to convince those good people there watching at home that you know exactly what you're talking about. So I'm going to read just a little bit of your bio. Bear with me, but you're a communications consultant with over 20 years of experience in strategy, media relations, writing, and messaging. I don't know how you're tracking this, but you've generated thousands of news stories and editorials on social issues in major national and regional outlets. And really one of the reasons why you're here for the social impact is you choose to work primarily for nonprofits, foundations, and other entities that are working to make progress on important issues affecting our nation. And my favorite one is years ago, PR Week named you one of the 30 under 30 outstanding PR practitioners to watch. Wow, that's pretty good. So of course, that's the bio, but I met you. I remember finally meeting you. The first time we worked together was around a U.S. Supreme Court case, and you not only helped me to get earned media coverage around that case, great earned media coverage, but more importantly, you taught me that there was a great cafeteria in the U.S. Supreme Court building that had good Wi-Fi, so we could drink our coffee and do our work there. It's not important. It's also important. It's just as important to get good media hits, but be comfortable while you're doing it. So I always remember that fondly. And I was thinking about that time kind of as a segue into what we're going to talk about here is the media pitch, but we were working around this big U.S. Supreme Court case. And for those that aren't familiar with how the Supreme Court works, I mean, basically, when you're trying a case, they have these blocks of time, right, Valerie? They say, okay, from this day to this day, we're gonna hear this case, and we know when the court case is going to be heard. But the decision, right, because we're preparing all of our communication stuff, the decision, we know the end date, and we know all the court cases that were being heard during that session. So we don't have an exact date as they start to release these things, but we kind of know, the end date when something's going to happen. So the way that you do this is, of course, because they're the U.S. Supreme Court and you have to be at the court to hear the decisions, right? And they have the interns running across the courtyard to the papers, but if you're a communications person and you're in charge of making sure all the communications goes out, you're sitting behind a computer, right? And we're watching SCOTUS blog is the one where you're kind of watching in real time what's happening, how the decisions they're going to announce that day. And they normally do. It's actually pretty fun. I found it that was my routine for like a couple weeks.
Exciting.
You wake up, you got your coffee, you've got the betting pool here with everybody at the office. Like, is it going to be today? I think it's going to be today. It's got to be today. So we're watching this big Supreme Court case decision, and I think it was down. This is my version of the story, Valerie. I know you might have a different. This is my version. We're down to like dates. There's like 2 or 3 days left, right? And we know, our case is still there. And I'm watching. It was a Friday morning, and I'm sitting there and I'm watching. And here it starts. SCOTUS blog's like, all right, first case is announced, and they do these 2 or 3 at a time. And the first one is marriage equality. Which, of course, me as a person, right? I'm thinking, this is a great announcement. This is a wonderful thing. I mean, I'm so happy for all my friends. Me as a communications person, Valerie, I'm like, holy crap. Please don't let my case come after this. How in the world is anybody going to care about what I have to say, given the magnitude of this announcement. So luckily for us, that our announcement was a couple days, but it just it made me think, and kind of segueing here to the media pitch, Valerie, is that not only in our day and age do we have to do the media pitch, right? But now we have this kind of bigger than life story that's going on around the Trump and this whole saga that we have to break through. So as we transition here to your conversation and your expertise, I wanted to start by talking about the importance of the media pitch, specifically as it relates to social impact.
Sure. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for anyone who's watching live or later. And let me just say that Philip is amazing. I don't think he'll sing his own praises, but he's fantastic. He's taught me a lot, and it's been such a pleasure anytime I get to work with him. So I was really honored to be invited to be on the very first of this series, and I'll be watching as you do more, because I'm sure there's a lot that I can learn from this series. So thank you for hosting them. It's interesting, what you talked about with the case and the ruling, and how you were kind of considering what else was coming down, because that would affect the level of interest in your own case. And I do think when dealing with the media, we really have to always keep that in mind. We're not working in a vacuum. It really is about, at the end of the day, what else is going on that day or that week in terms of how much interest you can get. And, that's one of the reasons why I feel like if you're doing a media campaign, you really need to think about not banking everything, and the best strategic planning that you can do on like a one-day story only, and like putting all your eggs in that basket, because something big could explode or happen. And then even though normally you would get a lot of coverage, everything gets pushed to the side for a huge story. So right now, I've been working with the media on pitching story ideas for about 20 years. And I've never seen it quite as difficult as it has been increasing. It's been increasingly so to get coverage on issues. So there might have been something I pitched 20 years ago that would have gotten 10 times the amount of coverage as it would today. And I think there's a couple reasons for that. One is what you mentioned, which is that the level of just pure, so huge and outrageous, depending on your position, things that are going on right now has really upped the ante for what is outrageous and what is huge. And it's just constant. It's constant up and down investigations. Yeah. There was the presidential campaign, and we've been through those before, but this was a presidential campaign unlike any other. And that's a huge issue. But also at the same time, we have kind of a perfect storm of where we've seen the media landscape changing so much, and a real shrinking of local, especially print reporters on the newspaper side. So there's less money, there's less revenue for print, everything's moving online, there's less reporters to pitch. So all of this together means that it's more important than ever that you really have to be more creative to get attention on an important issue. And for me, my career and yours have been dedicated to advancing causes that we personally believe in. So we're really fortunate to have that privilege.
It is nice.
We don't have advertising budget. So if we want to make a difference, this is a way we need to employ, and we need to, you can have a big impact on an issue through the media, but you have to be more creative than ever to make it actually break through. Let's say a reporter's getting 100 pitches a day. Yeah. To be the one, that day or that week that's selected, yeah, can be really challenging. So that's why, we thought it would be good to share with our fellow nonprofit minded individuals on their social causes, like, okay, well, how do you break through given the challenging circumstances?
Yeah, so before we jump into that, I just wanted to kind of bring out that one piece that you said there was, that a lot of times when we are advancing these social causes, we don't really have the budget, especially in comparison to the opposition that we're going against. So that's why this earned media can be such a huge component. I was trying to think of an example. I mean, certainly this is a big example, but the biggest example that I had, in my career was around the Standing Rock case, and just how much media earned media, and the passion of the people that just completely changed the narrative, and actually, at least initially, changed the outcome temporarily until Trump got in there. But how big of an impact that had in capturing the attention of people, and it wasn't an advertising budget or a lot of money behind it. It really was kind of grassroots earned media, just compelling stuff, certainly. But just so that's why we want to drive home the importance of having this conversation. So that's the importance, right, Valerie? So I want to know, you've given this conversation to lots of people. I mean, tell me the how. What's the first thing you really need to do in getting the perfect media pitch here? And I talk about too, like, this is hopefully we would talk about this in terms of those of you who might be starting out, or those of you who might be seasoned veterans. So hopefully everybody can get a little bit of something from this particular conversation. Go ahead, Valerie.
Sure. So thank you. Yes, and thank you for your leadership and great work on that super important situation, and really helping bring more national interest to it, Philip. Your work was really commendable on that. I mean, there's so many people doing great work to bring that to light. Yes, it's often that we're in a David versus Goliath situation. It's 100% true. So the first step, I think, is to, look at what issue you have that's important. Think about who you're trying to impact with media attention. So, who's the decision maker or decision makers that can help you further the cause, right? That's the only reason. I mean, in terms of bringing about social change, where you want to do media. Right. And then to take a step back from, take a step back from how passionate you are personally for the issue, because all of us are doing this because
care about this, right? Everybody, like, why even do this? Everybody should care about that, but that's not the case.
Right. So just take a step back and say, what does someone that is less personally already aware and as concerned as I am, what would they care about with this issue? Yeah. Try to take a 30,000-foot view of it, and then think about, how do you make it interesting, and how do you make your the newsworthy, the thing that's happening, how do you kind of simplify it, where if you were an editor at a newspaper, if you were writing the headline, what would that headline be? Right. And it can't be 3 sentences, or you haven't drilled it down far enough. So kind of think through that challenge. Yes. And also think about how do you, one of the challenges I think for us is that we get really involved in every incremental step in a process and an issue. And how do you make it more like what is happening right now is super important? It's not just an incremental 1 out of 500 steps that I personally care about. Yeah. I've gotten that feedback actually from reporters quite a bit of like, this is too incremental for us to share with our viewers. Right. So that's just something to consider. And then in terms of how do you give yourself the best chance of bringing attention to your issue? What I like to do is I have a mental checklist that I use of different elements of the kinds of things that appeal to the media. Okay. And whenever I can, I literally, each project, I think about how can I add some of these elements to a pitch and craft a pitch. So I break it down into who, what, when. Yep. And where, let's say. So, just really thinking.
Who, right. Let's jump in with the who, right?
Okay, so who? So it always helps if you have a high profile person. That can be an elected official. I mean, if Trump says something versus me, it's going to get a lot of attention, right? So thinking of high profile.
Yeah, just for the record, Valerie, I would listen to you over Trump. I'm just putting that out there. So
thank you. You and 3 other people.
Yes.
None of whom are related to me. No, I'm just kidding. But
me and the rest of the family would totally be into what you have to say.
The other thing is a celebrity. So if you may remember when Angelina Jolie wrote that op-ed in the New York Times about a double mastectomy, I mean, it was sort of a chatter piece, it was a chatter piece, meaning people would talk about it like, wow, that was an opportunity to really break into that issue. Yeah. Now, one of the things with celebrities, I mean, most of the times my clients that I work with, my nonprofits, don't have celebrities, banging down their door or available. And one of the things that I suggest is to think about, how can you attach a celebrity to your issue? So for instance, you can make a call, you can ask a celebrity for something publicly, and then you're kind of riding the wave of their name. So for instance, once I worked with a group that asked a young female star, it was a teenager, like, not to smoke in her roles because it was encouraging underage people to smoke. So she wasn't at all, on our campaign or signed up. We didn't have access to her, but by using her name, it got some press. Also kind of unexpected spokespeople. So if you have a business leader out there asking for something that you might be surprising, I've seen a lot of great attention from millionaires asking for tax increases, right? A millionaire asking for tax cuts, well, that's not surprising.
Right. But tax increases, that's a whole different ballgame, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The strange bedfellows. So you have two opposing people, groups, working together on something. They're normally enemies and they're coming together. That's always interesting. And then lastly, which is my personal favorite, are the type of stories that focus on individuals. So regular people like you and me that are really the heart of what your issue is all about. It's the family that is worried about coal ash contamination and they're drinking well. And they're saying, oh my God, I had no idea I was giving my infant, water that was contaminated from all this pollution. How could I do that? How could we let this stand?
Yes.
Those personal, compelling stories. That's my favorite in terms of really helping people understand like why what we work on is so important. So that's the who. Yeah,
I would, that last particular point too, one of the things that comes to mind, Valerie, particularly because we're talking about social impact, right? Is one of the trends that I really like and we need to see more of is this trend of organizations, communicators not speaking for, but speaking with or lifting up those that are actually impacted in the community. I mean, I think, from playing as a consultant and being behind the scenes at an organization, I mean, this is a push and pull. The organization wants to get their name out there, but it really, where we're starting to see people resonate and this trend go is where you're actually helping to amplify and lift up the people that are impacted and not trying to speak for them. And I really encourage groups to do that. Or if you are going to be on common ground with them, have enough participation to where you can speak with them. Don't just try to speak over them. And I think that's a big push and pull that I see in many organizations and people having to deal with. And it's one that I really hope continues that trend. So I just want to make sure that I am understanding over here. So we're starting with the who, right? So you're telling everybody we want to decide who our decision maker is, who's going to give us what we want, right? And what are the voices, before you start talking, what are the voices that are going to move or resonate with that person? Let's try to go there. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Because the same exact news from anybody else versus who is making the news, that's a really critical component. So even if one, expected group is doing something, bringing in these other voices is important.
Yeah, because I know my favorite one is, pitching to reporters, and I work in the environmental field, so they go, environmentalists are mad about, the environment, and they tell me something that I don't know. So it's always like, all right, I got to bring in a new hook. And so you're always trying to look for that impacted community or that unique angle too. So, all right, so we've got who, find somebody compelling. Now where do we go with this?
So now we're into the meat of it, which is the what. So the what exactly, how do you make the what of what you're talking about interesting and appealing? Of course it's important. It's affecting people, right? So one is a clear and dramatic effect on people and individuals. That's why anytime someone comes to me with a problem like this polluter is doing this or this injustice is happening here, I say, okay, who is being impacted? Give me the details and give me the specifics. Conflict most definitely gets attention. So if everybody's super sunny and happy and getting along, that's not in the press, right? That's not going to be of interest. Yesterday, I'm sure a lot of people are aware of the reporters being blocked from an event that Scott Pruitt was doing. And even
that was a big news in our field. So
horrible. And even an AP reporter being removed by the shoulders. Okay. Yes. Now, you think about that. The reporters that got in, and if no one was blocked and nobody had all that drama, no one would have talked about it, right?
You hate for the poor reporter, but boy, what a good hook that was, right? Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that's why it got attention, right? Another thing to look at on issues is trend stories. So someone once advised me, you need three examples to make a trend. So, don't just tell me about one isolated incident, get three and you can do a trend story. I had done a trend pitch years ago, for an example, about all the pro public transit walkability measures that were on ballots in an election cycle across the country and how they all performed pretty well. So I did pitching both beforehand, like previewing that this is a trend going on in America to national reporters, and then after looking at how they perform. So trends are another great thing to tap into if you can. One of my personal favorite of other types of pegs is a study or a new report with some pretty compelling findings.
Yeah.
New statistics.
Statistics. Who doesn't love statistics, Valerie?
And new information. So it could be, I've worked on things where tap water was tested, right? And you found contamination of drinking water supplies. And then the researchers even ranked which states and cities had the worst water. Yeah. Things like that. So you're adding new information to a problem, right? We all know drinking water should be better in America, right? But then you have new analysis coming out. Those sorts of things. Now, when it comes to when it comes to anything scientific and environmentally related, the best gold standard is to have peer review. Yeah. Which is where it's sort of a stamp of approval. It gets published in a journal of some sort. I've worked on many of those, and that's sort of a stamp that this is for real. It's not just somebody kind of raising alarm bells that don't need to be there. A lot of times you don't have the time for that because that's a very lengthy process. But I just put that out there. If you have time on your campaign and you can get a peer review, that's helpful.
Yeah, I was just jumping over there too. I mean, one of my pet peeves around this statistics or this new information, Valerie, is always like, I'm just not a numbers guy. I mean, you throw out these numbers to me. I don't know. You're like, 15 million people say, or this, and I'm like, okay, now what? I mean, like I always, and I admitted it's not easy to do, but I like the context or at least relating it to something else. Help people understand what this number means. Throwing out a number to me or a new statistic or a new fact, unless it's just completely obvious, right? Just doesn't resonate with me on a lot of these things. So I always encourage people to try to relate it to something, help to package that new fact with something that people understand a little bit more and help them give context for how big or how little or whatever the impact's going to be on this.
That's a great point, and I completely agree. And that's why if you have a study, for instance, I would look at who are the real people that it impacts.
Yes.
What are their stories? So you're kind of using the new information that you have, the new results of the study, to grab reporters' attention, and then you tell the story through the individual it impacts, and then you really want to bridge to the solution, like what action needs to happen to stop this, right? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, as communicators on causes, generally what we're really trying to get out there is this needs to happen to help people, right? And if you pick up the phone to a reporter and say that, well, it gives them, you really want to give them a reason where they have to cover that problem today, and then they can talk about your solution. So that's kind of how I see the role of studies and a lot of this, actually. The other thing is sort of politically speaking, elections always are obvious hooks. Mm-hmm. What candidates are doing? Are we asking candidates to take a stance on something? What Major policy decisions, those obviously add a lot of interest. Something that you and I both have a lot of experience in is also lawsuits. The filing of a lawsuit,
yes,
the settlement of a lawsuit, a hearing, like all these steps, they inject a real, a news happening around an important issue.
I'm glad you clarified that, because when you initially said that, you made it sound like I was an expert in getting sued. So I'm glad that you clarified that it was around us doing the communications work on that one, and for the viewers at home, that I'm not just getting all of these lawsuits. Yeah, that's a really good point. So Valerie, what you're really saying, I think in our business, we call this the hook, right? The what?
Yes.
Why is this relevant or interesting to us? Because I know a lot of times in working is that, when you work in an organization or client, they think that it's just interesting. Just having this information is in of itself going to be interesting to reporters. And I think that's our job, and that's where a lot of the tension can come between, you communicating to journalists what the organization or the contractor or wants, right? This is where a lot of conflict happens. So it's trying to make it newsworthy. And I know we talked last time, Valerie, about there's kind of two ways that you can do this, right? You can create your own kind of media hook in these things that you talked about, these really nice buckets of items. But then you can also monitor what's actually happening in the world and do more of kind of the rapid response on this one. So have all your stuff ready, watching the news, and then relaying what you want to try to say or what you're trying to communicate with the news on this one. Is that right?
Yes, that is very, very important point to emphasize, that you can both try to create news pegs and you can try to work with things that are already grabbing attention and kind of piggyback on those and use them as an opportunity to bring up some real issues and things that need to happen. So, for instance, there have been some really absolutely horrible things that have happened around the U.S. To people of color. And you saw not just attention on those exact incidences, but a real dialogue starting and people talking about the problems of racism that persist, the things that are going on, the laws that are exacerbating that, and how we need to address those as a society and the solutions. So that's an example. Another thing that, for instance, I was recently involved in is that there was a leak from a pipeline. And when that came out, that's a real opportunity to talk about, look, these leaks happen all the time. This happens to be a really big one comparatively, but it happens. And I think that as communicators and anybody in a nonprofit position of advocacy should try to always have bandwidth and the flexibility to deal with those situations quickly, because you can have such an impact, but you just need to be nimble and you need to do it quickly because the news hole ends very rapidly. Like, you have a very small window to get out there. I mean, I've been in situations where, like, I was in one that something happened and we got our statement out within 20 minutes and we were not the first ones.
Yes.
So it's just jumping in quickly and trying to, drive the attention on an issue as things happen in the country.
Yeah, I agree. And I just to kind of follow up with that point, and then we'll move on to the next topic over here, is this, that rapid response. I mean, having where you're seeing reporters or journalists already showing an interest in something and then helping to be a value add or a resource for them, can oftentimes take less time than, how do you think about how to get them interested? Once the interest is already there, you just adding on to the story, being that resource, that expert, giving them that extra little piece that you're talking about, that extra stat or that nuance to a story is really helpful. So I want to pause here for a second too. We got our first question, Valerie.
Oh, great.
Margot, I think Margot.
Oh my goodness. Hi, Margot.
So she's talked about the news cycle. We talked about this. News cycle is more crowded than it's ever been. Should we just try harder, have better news, or is there something else that we can do? And what are the new rules versus the old rules? So I just want to kind of tee this up, and we're going to talk about the new rules versus the old rules a little bit later, kind of to wrap up the conversation. But yeah, Margot, that's a great question. And so we talked about the news cycle, Valerie did lead off by saying how crowded the news cycle is. And I think that's why it's so important now to really be diligent and thoughtful about how you're doing and crafting these media pitches. So we talked about, defining the who, getting somebody compelling to be the storyteller to get that attention. And then we talked about the what, the actual media hook. Why is this relevant? Why is this now? And that's something that we can make on our own, or that we're monitoring in real time, watching the news breaks to help make that relevant. Is that anything you want to add to that, Valerie, or did I mess that up?
Well, first, let me just say that question's from Margot Freeman of DuPont Circle Communications, who is one of the most talented people out there in terms of, dedicating her career to advancing social justice through communications. And she's taught me more than I can teach her. That's for sure. She's a genius. That's for sure. I guess I think all those points are really great. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think it's a lot about, we have to reach a standard, I think, of breaking through that's even harder than we did, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I think one area that we have to change on is what we think deserves press attention because it's outrageous. Yes. Because I feel like we're in a new era of just shocking. Like, you think you're reading The Onion every day when you look at the media. You're like, no, that can't be happening. It just gets worse and worse, and it's so bad that, like, if we used to have to be here to show that's outrageous, we now have to be here. Yes. And I think that's really hard. So we have to do, the best job we can to make it as compelling as possible. But I also think that in some ways we just need to adjust our expectations and the targeting we do with reporters. So, for instance, something that might have gotten 100 stories some time ago might get less now. And in my opinion, and Margot was really great at this, that's okay, because now, especially with social media, if you get one or two amazing stories that are really well done, you can make sure the decision makers that can help improve your issue get those and see those, and you can get those to them. Also, while the daily newspaper universe in general has shrunk, there's been a big rise of specialty media that really has a huge impact. And you can think about, well, what are the specific, people I need to reach, and what are they looking at? And let me try to focus on those publications. So, sometimes a mainstream outlet is not necessarily the number one place to be. That's why you saw Obama pen an op-ed for SCOTUS blog. And I've known SCOTUS blog and been a huge fan, for a long time. But a lot of people were like, what is SCOTUS blog? I think I even saw a story about that. What is SCOTUS blog, and why did he decide to put an op-ed there? And it was just funny because it was such a smart choice to think about, well, that's a specialty publication about the Supreme Court, right, online, and a lot of people watch it. And I think that kind of thing, is how we can change the way we do things. I also think that we can pitch more exclusives to people. Yeah. Which often, give a story to one reporter, and that sometimes sweetens the deal a little bit if they're interested, because it's sort of like you're saying, look, I don't need to get 500 stories, and I don't expect to, but I just want, this one really good one. And lots of times it can expand out from there. But that's another, I think, way that we can kind of shift sometimes our strategy.
Yeah, I really like the one in particular, the specialty papers outlets that you're talking about. So many people have changed the way that they read media, right? And they certainly, there are journalists in there that are well respected and well read, that influence. But then also that can help, because they're so nuanced in what they cover. That can help seed larger coverage by starting with these specialty outlets and seeing people talk about them has generated larger coverage in the past too. So it's a great thing. So a great strategy for getting media on that one. So Valerie, I know you and I could talk about this stuff all day, and I'm trying. I want to try to keep this as concise as possible. We have about 5 minutes left, so I know.
Should I grab through some of the? I have some more in the what category of types of things.
Yeah, let's wrap up the what and let's move into the last category.
Okay. So other things are. So we talked a little bit about many different things, but shock value is important. Creative stunts, Greenpeace, they're kind of amazing at that. And you remember, as right after Trump got elected, they put the resist banner up that everybody was talking about. There was one with Taco Bell putting out this huge inflatable device in the ocean many years ago, where they said if some sky station piece hit it, everybody in America would get a free taco. I mean, creative stunts. I've worked on a thing where we hired an airplane with a banner, a message to fly around a company's headquarters. There's all sort of creative stunts. I also worked on something where we had 1,000 rubber duckies in Sacramento trying to get Governor Schwarzenegger, when he was governor, to sign legislation to protect kids from toxins that are found in rubber duckies. So creative stunts can really do a lot. So can protests, like, for instance, right after Parkland, there were about 30 people that went to a member of Congress who's against any gun safety measures and protested outside his office. If they just called the newspaper and said, hey, we're upset about this, probably nothing would have happened. They got some friends to go and hold posters, and it became coverage locally. Big annual events or anniversaries, those are important things to remember. Tax day, that sort of thing. When you get into today is the month for pizza or whatever, like you can get it every month and day is something. So you have to, the big ones is what I'm talking about, not the minor ones no one knows about. The other thing is just surprising news. So if as they say, if a dog bites a man, no one cares. If a man bites a dog, it's interesting. So as surprising as you can get. And then lastly, something to think about is if something interesting or surprising or even funny, there is humor sometimes in things, is caught on video, that, especially with social media, can then blossom into getting interest and getting media coverage. So for instance, if we had video of that AP reporter getting, moved by the shoulders out of that Pruitt event, I mean, you can imagine that would have exploded even more and been on like TV news everywhere. So those are just things to think about. And then the last thing is just the when, and I'll be really quick on that. So as somebody once told me, new is the root of news. So you really need to remember it has to be new information. Something new has to be happening. That really helps make your story interesting. You also want to preview as much as you can what's about to happen. So let's say you're going to release your study. I can guarantee you a reporter would rather write that a study being released today, like about to be released, says this, than saying like, oh, yesterday a study was released, right? The more you can be ahead of it, the better in thinking through your strategy. And it's especially important, like I think this is key to what Margot was asking. When the new things get old and stale, it's so fast. Like
our attention span is just it's over, especially journalists. They want to move on as quickly as possible on a lot of these things.
So we have to make something becomes old so quickly. It's like our bread and all the preservatives we're using in our food is lasting forever. The news is going the exact opposite, right? Mm-hmm. It's like you have a shelf life of what, an hour at this point, and it's like you want to release a statement about something that happened 3 hours ago. Well, what's the point, right? That you can get that reaction. So I think the when is really important. And the last thing I would say is that on the timing is that I'm so regularly asked to get something out there before a policy decision is made, right? That's the point. We're trying to affect a policy change, either stop a bad one or promote a good one. The problem is in that scenario, oftentimes the best news peg is after like a vote happens, right? Yeah. So I would just encourage everybody that's watching to think about in those kind of situations, both, not just being creative like we talked about and thinking of other news pegs, but thinking about moving to editorial boards. So those are the places, not the news side, but the editorial side, where a call to action is what the purpose is.
Yeah.
So they talk about what needs to happen, not what already has happened. So I think a lot of us don't emphasize enough the importance in editorials in calling for something that needs to happen in the future. So that's one thing I would just suggest everybody do.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So really this third point here, you did the who, the what, and now the when is really about timeliness and how rapid the environment is, in journalistic environment. Yeah, and Margaret was talking about just kind of going back to her question, the old versus new. One of the other things that I've seen, and I know you and I have discussed this, and you mentioned it, is that there's so much more speculation now. People, by the time the actual event happens, the article's already been written, right? I mean, if you do want to quote or you do want to influence that, in the past, I don't know, a couple of years ago, you could have the event happen. They would come out and say, well, what do you think about this event? Let me get your quote about it. But I know, in particular around President Trump's executive orders, well, there was rumors for weeks about what was actually happening, right? And of course, the organization that I work for, they wanted to make sure that they read everything clearly, right, before they could comment, because we didn't even see anything. They would, in the way the Trump administration would do it, they would make the announcement, but they wouldn't show you anything. They would make the announcement in the morning, but they wouldn't actually show you any language until 3 or 4 o'clock. Well, that was driving reporters crazy. So we had to kind of shift our strategy to be a little more speculative and a little bigger picture. So we couldn't get into the nitty gritty, and we had to be upfront, well, we haven't actually seen this, but here's what we've heard and kind of what we're thinking. And that was a zone that wasn't very comfortable for a lot of people that are so used to sitting with this stuff. But if you want to be in the news cycle, that was what you had to do. And I feel like that's shifting even more. If the story of the news already happens and you're not already in it, the chances of you being in it are very, very slim. So it's really being out front of these things and being a little more speculative than what we used to be able to do. So, well, good. So we talked about, just kind of make sure I'm going to say, we talked about the importance, because this rapid changing thing, the who, finding compelling storytellers, right? Not just you. The when, not just because you think it's good news, but having some sort of hook that you either generate or you're watching this covered. And I'm sorry. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. It was the what. I jumped to the when too far. My bad, Valerie. The what.
That's okay.
Of course, the when, which is the timeliness of this, trying to make sure that you're in this either before the news happens or very closely after it begins to break. Anything else that you want to add to that? I know there's a couple other little minor questions that I have, but anything else that we want to discuss about that?
No, if you have any questions, go ahead. That's great. All I would just say is, I know it's really hard.
Yep.
And I would just say that we're doing our work because we're really trying to help people.
Yes.
And I think that it can be hard when you get a lot of rejection, but you just have to remember, I'm doing this to be helpful and to make the country or the world a better place. And I have to just keep going, and it will work with some perseverance. So that's just one thing.
I agree. And I think a couple things come to mind. I know I'm a little old-fashioned about this one, but it's also relationship building too, as well. I mean, the media pitch is important, but if you're doing just the media pitch solely alone and not cultivating a relationship with the journalists that you work with in your industry, that's a big one. But that's a whole other topic for another conversation. But also, Valerie, too, I think, just kind of the nuts and bolts of this thing. When you talk about the who, what, and when, I mean, we're not talking about 2 or 3 pages over here. We need something that's pretty concise. Again, going back to the attention span and the demand. And I know a lot of times, too, the advice is, I hear people talk about blogs, and they talk about what's the most important part of your blog. And they say, well, it's not so much the content, is that I spend at least 30-40% of my time trying to figure out what the headlines are, too. So when you're writing this media pitch, I'm just hoping you could touch on, kind of just the nuts and bolts. I mean, should it be as concise as possible? Or, what do you think about headlines? How important are those in trying to get the perfect media pitch?
Right. Well, as I mentioned initially, if you think about what would a headline like an actual story be,
yes,
that is definitely helps you boil it down. And then if you're emailing a pitch, which is a lot of how it happens these days. When I started, there was no voicemail or anything, and no email, and no, it was
What did you do? How did you get to
At
him?
least my office didn't have voicemail. I can't say nobody did, but it felt like you had to keep calling reporters and we faxed them. And yeah, we spent a lot of time at the fax machine. But now I think the email subject line is basically to a reporter, like what if you're a writer,
Yeah.
what the grabbing headline is. I mean, how many times have you read an article online and you're like, that sounded much more sensational in the headline than the actual meat is, right? Because they're trying to grab people. So I do think the subject line is really important.
Yeah.
If I'm writing a press release, yes, the headline. I mean, I agree. I spent a lot of my time there. You know, I think what's important is just to make sure that you can have the gist of it in the subject line. It can be interesting and seemingly, you know, important, time sensitive, and that you can explain it a little bit more detail within a few sentences. I think it's fine when you're emailing somebody to include more information than that, of course.
Yeah.
With some more details. I mean, they have a choice to open your email or not, and then to read the first few sentences and keep going or not, really. That's how I approach it. But I just want to make sure if they only read the subject line or if they only read the first couple sentences, they get the gist of what it's about and make a decision from there.
Yeah, well, thanks, Valerie. I mean, it's so funny as we're even digging into this. My head's going in all different other directions of conversations we can be having. I mean, it's just it can be so nuanced, but this has been good. I really appreciate you telling us the importance of the who, the what, and the when. Certainly appreciate your time and your expertise, Valerie. This has been fun. And then for those that are watching, live or the archive version, do welcome you to put your own comments or suggestions down there. I think people are going to look at this to try to get more expertise in the media pitch. So if you have best tips or practices, would welcome them there, and certainly any sort of questions or comments for future dialogue. So Valerie, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you for having me.
Digging more into this into another topic in the near future. So good luck, Valerie, and thanks again. All right.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye.
Thanks everybody for watching. Take care.
Bye-bye.